Well, good morning, class. It's a beautiful morning here as I'm doing these annotations. And I want to apologize that this is coming to you a little bit late. But I'm ready to start with the second half of not second half, second third of the annotations that we're doing for the cave. And to do this, I wanted to just take us back to the picture that we went over in the previous video and just review the basics of the cave one more time in case anybody's coming at this and forgot a couple things. So at the beginning of the story, we have a man. He's circled here, all right? He is staring at the wall of a cave, and in the background, there are these puppeteers who have these puppets, and there's a fire back here shining through the puppets, and the puppets make shadows on the cave, and it's like a big puppet play going on. And this person, all these people here, they believe that this is reality, that this is truth, that when they're looking at the wall of the cave, that truth is happening. But then we have a person, you see the question mark. He is freed somehow. He is freed probably by a person as we read along. That's the most likely way. And he's able to look around, and he's able to look, and he's blinded by the light, right? He's blinded by, and he's confused. He's blinded by the light, and he's confused about what's going on. But eventually he gets dragged out of the cave. The word here is compel, which once again basically has the idea that somebody helps him out of the cave. But when he comes out of the cave, it's bright. You can see the guy's hand over his eyes here. He comes out. He can't see clearly at first. He can only see shadows. Then he can see reflections in the water. Then he can see most clearly by night, and then finally by day. And then eventually he can see the sun itself, which is the source of light and truth. Right? We talked about that. It's the source of truth. All right, he comes back in. His note here that we have this great image that he has truth. He has seen truth, and he points, okay, outside. But people think he's a fool because his eyes are not accustomed to the dimness anymore, and so he doesn't actually say things that they think sound smart. And as a matter of fact, they think he's so unwise, so dumb, that they eventually kill him because they don't understand what he's saying. So we've got this loop that goes on in this picture that goes like this. And that's the basics of the cave. And now we're going to take those ideas and we're going to move them a little further. And Socrates / Plato, because once again, just reminding you that we're really talking about the same person here. Plato's using Socrates. It's Plato writing, but he's using Socrates as the person who's talking in his text. They're going to tell us what the main, get to some of the main ideas that we can pull out of this cave. So let's just go ahead and read it together. We stopped right here, so we'll pick it up from there. Come then, that's Socrates, I said, and join me in supposing this too. And don't be surprised if the men who get to that point. Now this point here, okay, is outside in the light. Aren't willing to mind the business of human beings, but rather that their souls are always eager to spend their time above. Surely that's likely if indeed this too follows the image which I told before. So there's the above, that's the outside, right? So note here the business above is outside and the business inside is the business of human beings. So we could call this we could say the wisdom of man. Okay. And the person conversing with Socrates says, of course, that's likely, right? Once he's been outside and he's seen the truth, he's not going to want to be inside. And what about this? Do you suppose it is anything surprising, I said, if a man come from acts of divine contemplation? So divine contemplation is the type of thing you do outside in the light, right? Divine being godlike. And we said earlier that basically the light represents truth. It represents higher knowledge. So this would be godlike then, godlike contemplation. Contemplation is considering things. So when he comes from godlike consideration to human evils, is graceless and looks quite ridiculous when, with his sight still dim and before he has gotten sufficiently accustomed to the surrounding darkness. So he's ridiculous when he is compelled in courts or elsewhere to contest about the shadows of the just or the representations of which they are shadows, and to dispute about the way these things are understood by men who have never seen justice itself. So, once again, do you guys remember Plato is talking, even though Socrates is talking in the text, I would argue that Plato is talking about Socrates here. And I'm not going to say that I'm 100% sure about this, but I am 98, I think I said 0.3% sure. That's what I said last time or something like that, right? I mean, the courts condemn Socrates to death. So will this person not look ridiculous when judged before courts of men? In other words, what Plato is saying is that people judged Socrates because their eyes were dim. So Socrates put to death because men's eyes were dim. That's why. It's not all surprising, he said. But if a man were intelligent, an intelligent man, I said, he would remember that there are two types of disturbances of the eyes. So two kinds of disturbances of the eyes stemming from two sources. When they have been transferred from light to darkness and when they have transferred from darkness to light. So this is very simple, nothing complicated. You're blinded both when you go from darkness to light, and you can't see well when you go from light to darkness. It takes eyes time to adjust. And if you held that these same things happen to a soul too, so if you apply that to a soul, whenever he saw one that is confused and unable to make anything out, he wouldn't laugh with reasoning, but would go on to consider whether come from a brighter life its darkness for the want of being accustomed, or whether going from a greater lack of learning to a greater brightness is dazzled by the greater brilliance. That's just a confusing way of saying, in other words, the person thinks a person seems ridiculous. Instead of laughing at them, like we said in the picture, we would consider, wait, do they act this way because they're from the light coming to darkness, or because of the darkness going to the light? He does have a few words here, right? Lack of learning to brightness, so lack of learning to learning, okay? So definitely it's better to be in the light. And if he wanted to laugh at the second soul, so that would be the one that is lack of learning, so the person originally coming out of the cave from the darkness to light, his laughing in this case would be less a laugh of scorn than would his laughing at the soul which has come out of the light. In other words, you would scorn the person less, okay, who goes from the light to the darkness, okay, than from the darkness to the light. So I don't know. So light to darkness, this would be a lesser sign, okay, than the darkness to the light. For all you math people, hopefully I did that correctly. It's a greater sign. You would scorn, so this would be scorn. Okay? What you say is quite sensible, he said. Then if this is true, we must hold the following about these things. Education is not what professions of certain men assert it to be. They presumably assert that they put the soul into the soul knowledge that isn't in it, as though they were putting sight into blind eyes. In other words, if a person is in the darkness, what good is education? Right? If a person is not going towards the light, what good is education? It's like putting sight into blind eyes. Yes, he said, they do indeed assert that. But the present argument, on the other hand, I said, indicates that this power is the soul of each, and the instrument with which he learns just as an eye is not able to turn to the light without the dark, without the whole body, must be turned around from that which is coming into being together with the soul until it is able to endure looking at what is and the brightest part of which is. Can we affirm that this is the good? Don't we? Now, this is a confusing paragraph, and you guys can help me out a little bit with this as well. Maybe come to me or your other teacher with ideas here, but here's kind of what I get from it. Each human has a soul, okay? And the instrument with which each person learns, okay, that would be your senses. He mentions the eye is not able to turn toward the light from the dark without the whole body. It must be turned around from that which is coming into being together with the whole soul until it's able to endure looking at that which is and the brightest part of what is. Now, is just simply talking about reality here. And he says we affirm this to be the good. Now, we used good in the last video, and the good here is referred to in other texts as truth, or it refers to Plato's God, which we'll talk about later. Okay? So here's my proposition to you, and I think this is a confusing paragraph, so if you have any ideas, let me know. But my interpretation of this is this, that you can learn, but unless your whole body is willing to turn towards the good, towards truth, then it really doesn't really do much good. It's like putting sight into blind eyes, right? In other words, part of education is an attitude. Part of education is wanting to do the right thing, is wanting to search for truth. And see, this is a major argument that we have here. We're going to talk about the Ring of Gyges in the next section. And the idea is, why do we do good? Why do we pursue truth? Why do we do the right thing? Because in the Ring of Gyges, the argument is, well, if you want to look out for yourself, then sometimes maybe you don't tell the truth. Sometimes maybe you hide the truth. Sometimes maybe you distort the truth. Sometimes you do that to the truth in order to have your own personal gain. And I know this for sure. Plato would say, no, you don't do that. You always pursue the truth. And so I think this is him saying that here, that it's useless to teach someone unless they are willing to pursue truth above all other things. Yes, there would therefore, I said, be an art of this turning around. The art of this turning around, so this pursuing truth, concerned with in the way with which this power can most easily and efficiently be turned around, not an art of producing sight in it. Rather, this art takes as given that sight is there. I set up here that Plato believes that every human has a soul. Okay? And another thing that Plato believed is that every human knows truth. They just have to remember truth, okay? It's there. It's in your memory. You know it. It's like your conscience, okay? Your soul knows what is right and wrong. You just have to remind it. You have to turn it towards it. But rightly turn nor looking at what ought to look at, and accomplishes this object. In other words, there should be some way that we can convince people to pursue truth. So it seems, he said. Therefore, the other virtues of the soul, as they are called, are probably somewhat close to those of the body. For they are really not there beforehand, and are later produced by habits and exercises. while the virtue of exercising prudence is more than anything somehow more divine. Godlike, right? It seems it never loses its power, but according to the way it is turned, it becomes useful or helpful again, or useless and harmful. Or haven't you yet reflected about the men who are said to be vicious but wise? How shrewdly their petty, small soul sees, and how sharply it distinguishes those things towards which it is turned, showing that it doesn't have poor vision, although it is compelled to serve vice, so that the sharper it sees, the more evil it accomplishes. Most certainly. This is one of my favorite paragraphs. There's so much to unpack here. You see, what he's saying here is that prudence is doing the right thing. And so the virtues of the soul are kind of like that of the body, in that you achieve them by achieving habits. So you achieve being kind by being kind often. You love better by persevering through hard times and loving people. It takes practice to get these things done. And once you do this, okay, prudence, okay, is a little different. It's more divine, it seems. It never loses its power. It's a slightly different thing. That choice, the choice to do the right thing, is something that a person who doesn't have very many habits can still do. A 3-year-old can choose to do the right thing, or they can choose to do the wrong thing. And so really there's the specific things, right? The virtues, and then there's the main thing, I guess to call it, would be you have to choose to do the right thing. And he says that's the difference between people, right, who who are wise but do wrong, and people who are wise and do right, right? For people who are wise and want to do right, then prudence is useful and helpful. But for those who choose to do wrong, it's useless and harmful. I think of some shows that I've watched where there's this argument that if you do good, then you are at a disadvantage, right? Good equals disadvantage. Because if you're playing this game, then doing right does really put you at a disadvantage. It really, really does. It makes it so that you are weak, and it makes it so that people can predict what you're going to do. And so in a game of deceit and deception, you're at a disadvantage if you always do good, right? And that's what Plato is saying here, that people who play this game see doing good as a disadvantage, and it's useless and harmful. So the question is, what game will you play? See how this goes all the way back to the beginning? That's why this decision here is the core decision. What game are you going to play in your life? Most certainly, he said. However, I said, if this part of such nature were trimmed in early childhood, and its ties of kinship with becoming were cut off like leaden weights, which eating and such pleasures, as well as the refinements naturally attached to the soul and turn its vision downward, if I say were to rid them and turned around towards the true things, this same part of the same human beings would also see them most sharply, just as it does those things towards now which is turned. So this is another tough paragraph because the wording is rough, but really, as far as I can tell, this is saying that training, if I could spell correctly, here, hold on. Training for the soul is best done when people are young. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this. I think that's what it's saying. Once again, you can come to me and let me know, but that's kind of what I'm getting from this, right? If you unattach these harmful things at an early age, then people are more likely to turn towards this good soul. It is likely, he said. And what about this? Isn't it likely and necessary as a consequence of what was said before, that those who are without education and experience of truth would never be adequate stewards of a city, nor would those who have been allowed to spend their time in education continuously to the end. The former, so this is the first one, because they don't have any single goal in life which they must aim in doing everything they do, private or in public, and the latter, because they won't be willing to act, believing they have immigrated to a colony in the Isles of the Blessed while they are still alive. So this one here is more clear. There's two people that are not suitable for running a city. The first one is a person who does not have truth. All right? So one is no truth. Okay, I'm going to put to rule up here. No rule. One is no truth, and one is no desire. Right? The first person doesn't have truth. The second person won't be willing. They won't willing to go back down into the cave. True, he said. Then our job as founders, I said. Now, the whole thing, I don't think I've explained here. The Republic is all about how you would found a city. It's like a thought experiment on the best way to found a city and run it efficiently. I think I might have mentioned that a little bit at the very beginning of the first video, but that's what he's talking about here. Our job as founders is to compel the best natures to go and study, which we were saying before is the greatest. Okay? Truth. To study truth. And to do that in a way where they want to do the right thing. To see the good, right? And go up to that ascent. Actually, so probably more specifically, what here would be the good. To study the good. And when they have gone up and seen sufficiently, not to permit them what is now permitted. Okay? So not to allow them what we let them do now. What's that? To remain there, I said, and not be willing to go down again among those prisoners and share their labors and honors, whether they be slighter or more serious. What, he said? Are you going to do them an injustice and make them live a worse life when a lot better life is possible for them? So I'm going to end this reading here. Basically, the question is, at the end, should you go back into the cave? If you do reach the outside of the cave, do you need to go back in? Just a quick reminder before we start the next video. This is what happened. This is a possibility of what might happen if you go back into the cave. People might think you are unwise. They might persecute you. They might even kill you. Interesting thoughts. All right, we'll pick this up again a little bit later. Take care.